Okay, good evening, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're going to be learning Maseches, Horiyos, Daf, Vav Amud Beis, and as much of Zion as we can get through before the 9:30 Maariv. What day is it today? Monday. I'm here Tuesday. I'm not here Wednesday. I'm pretty sure I'm here Thursday, but I'm definitely not here Wednesday. We just have a program that I have to be at, so I won't be available.
Yeah, I can fill in for you.
That would be an honor and a privilege, except that I want Stan to come to my event. I haven't told them about it yet, so no, nothing. That's fine. 8 lines from the bottom, says the Gemara.
Like that one, Dave?
Tanu Rabbanon. The rabbis taught us in a brisa. We are 3 lines into the wide lines on Vav Amud Aleph. The Gemara says, Meis echad min hatzibur chayavin. Let's say that a tzibur made a mistake. We have to figure out who the author of this brisa is. So if one person from the tzibur died, I mean, obviously, you're still going to bring the par helam davar shel tzibur, right? The Sanhedrin will still bring that korban. Echad mi bezdin, but if one of the dayanim who was involved in the psak, if one of the dayanim died, so then pturin, even if only one person from the Sanhedrin died, again, perfect scenario of Horiyos. They gave a psak, rov of the tzibur followed it. One of the dayanim died. The halacha is that they are pater from the par helam davar shel tzibur. So says the Gemara, Mantana, who is this like? Amar Rav Chizda, Amar Reb Zera, Amar Reb Yirmiyah, Amar Rav. 4 generations of Amoraim, one after the other. Must be Reb Meir. The Amar Bezdin Meviin velo tzibur. Here we can see that because he holds that Bezdin brings and velo tzibur hilkach meis echad min tzibur chayavin. The tzibur is not the one who brings anyways. So that's why they're pater. So says the Gemara, the Hilkach Meis Echad Min Hatzibur Chayavin, the Ha'akaim Kule Bezdin, the whole Bezdin is still alive. If the one guy who died was from the Tzibur and not from the Bezdin, we're good to go, and therefore the Korbanos are as they're supposed to be. But Meis Echad Mi Bezdin, if one of the people from the Sanhedrin died, Peturin, the Havi Lechatas Shemeis Echad Min Hashutfin. If people are shutfin and they are obligated to bring a chatas together, and one of the shutfin die, so the halacha is that the other person is pater. We're going to be spending an amud talking about this din, about the din of shutfin as it relates to the din of I lost my line here. Of that chatas shemes echad mina shutfin, whether or not they're actually pater. Maskif lo Rav Yosef v'nukma kirib Shimon. This brisa that we started with, that if it's meis echad min hatzibur chayavin and echad mi bezdin pturin, we don't have to say it's Rav Meir. We could say it's Rav Shimon. How could we say it's Rav Shimon? To Amar, he would say bezdin im hatzibur. We're missing a word here. Bezdin miviin im hatzibur. Remember that Reb Shimon was of the opinion that Bezdin and the Tzibur would both bring a par helam davar shel tzibur. This is something we learned about on Shabbos and last night. And therefore, if somebody died from the crowd, wouldn't change anything because ein tzibur mesim. You can't kill the tzibur. If I should say, if anybody still exists, then the tzibur still is allowed. You can't stop any chiyuvim that come from the tzibur. Meis echad mi bezdin turim kedamrinan dechatas shutfini. So it's possible that really we could understand our Mishnah to be this brisa, I should say, that we started with today, which is actually a Tosefta, the Tosefta from 3 lines down into the wide lines. Perhaps it's not Rav Meir, perhaps it's Rav Shimon, and the Gemara gives a sophisticated response. Amar le Abaye, Sham'inan leila Rav Shimon. It can't be, he says, because he holds the Amar Chatas Shutfin Eina Mesa. He says that the Chatas of a Shutfin, they never die. In other words, it's not like you just tried to say that the chatzas shutfin he and therefore they're putter. He holds that they're still chayiv. Where do we see this? The Tanya. Par v'sa'ir shel Yom Kippurim. These are the animals that are brought on Yom Kippur. She'avdu. Let's say they were lost. V'hefer shacherim tachtehem. And other animals replaced the par and the sa'ir. And then those animals were found. Yamusu kulan divi Reb Yehuda. All of those animals are, they basically have to die. They can't be used for korbanos. Rebbe Lazar, Reb Shimon Omer, and this is the Reb Shimon that we're looking for. Yiru, they have to graze until they get a mum, and then they're cashed out. Levi she'ein chatas tzibur mesa, because the chatas of a tzibur never dies. So the Gemara here shows us that Abaye's approach is that you can't say what you wanted to say within Reb Shimon. You can't say that you'd be pater from chatas shutfin, because according to Reb Shimon, he says, Ein chatas tzibor mesa. So he says, therefore, it can't be that this brisa is like the opinion of Reb Shimon. So Amrle Rav Yosef, hold on one second. Rav Yosef says, Kohanim, Kohamres, you're talking to me about a case of Kohanim. How can you say that? We're talking about the din of Yom Kippur, right? The Parvis Sayur. Shiny Kohanim, the Ikru Kal. Kohanim, by themselves, have a din of Kal. Remember yesterday we were discussing whether or not a Shevet has a din of Kal? The Kohanim, as a group, they're not even a shevet bichlal. They're part of a shevet. They actually have a din of kal. Dichsiv ala kohanim ve'al kol ha'am hakahal yechaper. So from here, it seems to be that the kohanim taka do have a din of kahal. That's what the Gemara says. Says the Gemara, elamayata, and Rashi fills in the gaps. Elamayata the kohanim ikru kal. If in fact they are considered to be a kal, the kohanim by themselves, nesu par behora. Then what if the Kohanim give a psak incorrectly? They should be chayav to bring a par helam davar shel tzibur like any shevet, at least according to the shitas that a shevet can do so. That can't be, because then tafi leishvatim. Then we have more than 13 groups, because we have more than 12 kahalim, because we have all 12 shvatim, and we also have the Kohanim. So now the numbers don't work from the Mishnayos that we learned yesterday from all the Mari Mekomos. Alam Ravacha Reb Yaakov Shifto Shal Levi Lo Ikru Kal. There are times when the Kohanim are called a Kal, but in general, Shevet Levi is not referred to as a Kahal. B'chsiv Hinanim Mafrecha V'Hir B'Sicha U'Nsaticha L'Kal Amim, and we actually need the rest of the pasuk, which I'll read for you. V'Nasati Es Ha'aretz Hazos L'Zaracha Acharecha Achuzah Salom. They have their little sprachs of land. They get the 42 pieces of the 42 cities at the Levim. They don't have a Shevet. So that's what the Gemara says, is that the Shevet of Levi is not really always called a Kahal. Kol sheyesh lo achuza ikri kal. Anyone that has an achuza, that has an ancestral right to the property, to Eretz Yisrael, they're a Kahal. But the Levim didn't have that, and therefore, b'chol she'ein lo achuza lo ikri Kahal. Im Kain, says the Gemara, that really should. That's the next question, because we said that Kohanim are really not a part of the account. So now we're back to 12. And now the Gemara is saying, well, actually, we don't even have 12. So Imkain Chasre Luhu Yud Beis Shvatim. We're actually missing 12 Shvatim. That's going to be the Gemara's answer. Very good. Well, why am I even here? You guys should do this on your own. You're asking the questions, you're giving the answer. I know, yes. That's yes. That's what the Gemara says. Or to frustrate you when I give shiur underwater. Yes, so those are all also. So, I know. He did tshuva. I don't know who did tshuva. You're so evil that I was the one who had to do the tshuva. So that's what the Gemara says in Kain Chasre Lo Yud Beis Shvatim. But again, the Mari Mekomos we were learning the last couple of days spoke about Yud Beis Shvatim. So who are the Yud Beis Shvatim? So to this, the Gemara says, Amar Abaye, and this is actually how we view the Yud Beis Shvatim. Levi was never a Shevet. We know that Levi didn't have a Chelik Menachal of Eretz Yisrael. Amar Abaye, Ephraim, Menashe, Kiruven, V'Shimon, Yehuli. So that's how we have our 12 Shvatim. So it's really the initial 12 brothers, minus Levi, minus Yosef, because Yosef didn't have, plus Ephraim and Menashe. So 12 minus 2 plus 2 is 12. And that's how we get to our count of 12 Shvatim. Amar Rava, wait 1 second. V'haksiv al shem achem yikaru b'nachal asam. They're going to be like their brothers. L'nachala hukshu. Ephraim and Menashe were only shvatim in as much as it related to nachala, below the davar acher. So you can't tell me that as it relates to our discussions about par helam davar shel tzibur, don't tell me that they actually have anything to do with the Yud Beis Shvatim. The only time they have a status of shevet is for nachala. Again, that's also not how we view things. When we talk about the Yud Beis Shvatim, about the Shivtei Ka, we talk about Ephraim and Menashe. Says Gemara below, really? They didn't have any other aspects of their lives that seemed to be like they were regular Shvatim. After all, v'hachalukin b'degalim. When they were traveling, they had their own degel. That's something that seemed clear from the Chumash. We know that when the Jews were traveling, and even their encampments around the Mishkan, it was very strategic, it was very carefully placed, and they were grouped in such a way that they had a degel, that each, let's call it a shevet, each shevet had a flag. And Ephraim had a flag, and Menashe had a flag. So it wasn't just by Nachla. So don't tell me that we don't have 12 as it relates to Parhalim Davar Shel Tzibor because it was only by Nachla that we had Ephraim and Menashe. It's not true. We also had it by Degalim. Says the Gemara, that's only Kenachalasim Kachanayasim K'Teilacha Lekavod Degalim. That wasn't really because the Shvatim were unique Shvatim. It was just to give kavod to the grouping, as it were. A little, you would need some lumdas here to actually parse out what this means, but it seems to be that there was some value to the degel itself. Afal pi that the degel should have represented a shevet, it really more represented a group, irrelevant of it being a shevet. I b'hachalukim b'nisim. By the korbanos of the Nisim, we know that they were chalukin, that they were separated. Lachlo kavod l'nisim. The Tanya, Shlomo asa zayin yimei mishneh, umarua Moshe laso shnei masar yimei Chanukah. Why is it that when Shlomo was anointing the Beis Hamikdash, he did so with 7 days, and when Moshe was anointing the Mishkan, he did so with 12? So says the Gemara, lachlo kavod l'nisim. So we really don't know exactly how all this counting works. Do we say that Ephraim and Menashe are involved? Do we say that they're not involved? It ends by saying that perhaps the Gemara is right, that it's only a din by Nachla that we say that Ephraim and Menashe are Kiruven, Shimon, Yehuli. So good. This really, really great sugya here to just think about and figure out what Shevet we're all from, and was Ephraim really right? These are very, very interesting sugyas. Anyways, my Havela. Remember, we're sidetracked over here because we were trying to figure out the din of Chatos Tzibor Mesa or not from the bottom of the previous page with Ruv Shimon. And in fact, Rashi over here, or whoever this is, does a beautiful job of asking this question of my Havela halfway down in the Rashis, a couple of inches below where we are. My Havela. I Havadafka Hada Abaye, the Amar, the Shaminan Le, the Ruv Shimon, the Chatos Hashutvan Ena Mesa, Olav Dafka. Was Ruv Shimon saying that Chatos Hashutvan Ena Mesa, was that true, yes or no? Tashma. Let's try and bring an answer to this. And from here until the end of the parak is going to be the answer to this question about the din of Reb Shimon. And let's try and figure it out. Titania, Reb Shimon Omer, Chamesh Chatos Mesos. There are five types of chatos that will always have to die. They can't be karev anymore. There are 5 animals that were, we'll see what they were, that might have been used for a korban. They can't anymore. Vlad chatos. An animal's earmarked for a chatos and the animal gives birth. That vlad cannot be used as a chatas because the mother was already earmarked. You can't give both. Utmuras chatas. If a chatas was switched from one to another, bitmura, so that's not allowed. That means that if it was done, that the new tmura animal will be kept for death. It'll just sit there until it dies. V'chatas shemesu be'aleha. This din we've learned about many times in Shas. You can see a couple of Mari Mekomos on the side. Maseches Yoma Daf Nun, and then it says Visham Nisamein. There's other Mari Mekomos over there, which is an interesting language of the Masoras Hashas. And that is that if a chatas was separated for a person to bring it, and then the bailim died, so then that animal is it's not to be used. Let's say that I did a chet b'shogeg and I separated an animal, but then I ended up bringing another animal, animal B instead of animal A. But I did already separate animal A. Animal A has to die. Whenever a chatas is brought, it's always less than a year old. By the way, this is great yedias klalius. If anybody always asks how old is a korban chatas, it has to be less than a year. So let's say it's 352 days old, and the year is 354 days long in the Yiddish year, minus all the random years. So then, if that animal traverses the day 354, the animal is no longer roi to be karav al mizbech as a chatas, so that also dies. Now, you can't say the idea that the vlad of a chatas would be applicable by a tzibor, that it would die by a tzibor. She'ain tzibor mafresh in nekeva. For the tzibor, we never bring in a keva, and a regular chatas isn't a keva. So we see there's no shaychus between those two things. You can't say that the din of tmura applies by a tzibor. She'ain tmura b'tzibor. We don't even allow for tmura b'tzibor. You can't even say that the din of chatas shemesu be'aleh would apply b'tzibor because there's no such thing as a tzibor that's mace. Who can die? You don't need all the Jews to die, chas v'shalom. So that's not possible. The problem with this is that the last 2 of the 5, we don't really know the din. The Gemara says, "Sheniskapru be'aleh avruha shnasa lo shamanu." These 2 things, if I separated out animal A and instead brought animal B, so then animal A is not allowed to be carved anymore. Or the last din that we learned about, which is that if the animal turns a year old, The chatas turns a year old. We don't know the halacha, how these two cases intersect with the world of tzibur. That we don't know. Yachol yamusu. Maybe we should have said, like the brisa that we're learning opened, that all five of them die. When we were talking about Yechidim, we knew this was true. But we're not true. We're not sure what the halacha is when it comes to a tzibur. So it says the Gemara Amers. Perhaps we should say Yilmod Sasim and Amafurash. Maybe we should learn that which we don't know from that which we do. We know the first three, that as they relate to tzibur, there's no applicability for the reasons stipulated above. So perhaps the two that we don't know about, the case of Shanis Kapru Be'aleh and Sha'avra Shnasa Lo Shamanu, perhaps those cases as well, we should apply the same halacha. Mematzinu bevlad chatas v'tmuras chatas v'shemesu be'aleh b'yachid dvarim amurim v'lo b'tzibur. That's only that they're mesu by a yachid, but not by a tzibur. So we should say, after the last two cases, sheniskarpu b'lev sh'avra shnasa b'yachid dvarim amurim v'lo b'tzibur. Says the Gemara, what kind of svar is that? V'chidanin efshar mishe'i efshar. The two cases that we're talking about are cases where they may apply to tzibur. We just don't know the answer. The previous three cases that we saw, those are the three cases of Vlad Chatas, Tmuras Chatas, and Chatas Shemesu Be'aleh. We said those can't apply to a tzibur. So you're trying to learn, I should say, the last two that we don't know anything about to the first three that we know for sure can't apply by a tzibur. But perhaps you're comparing Efshar to Efshar. We can't. The first three are EFshar. They can't work that way, and it's where the halacha is for sure going to be different. So says the Gemara, Reb Shimon b'chad makom gamir. Reb Shimon has the same halachic status for all of these particular ones. If ever you want to see that this is not Rashi, look at the length of the Rashi that's on this Dibra Masker. On the outer margin, v'chidanin efshar mish'i efshar, and then see how long that Rashi goes. It's kimat a raya brura that this is not Rashi. It happens, but it's in Shas that is anomalous. It would be very, very, very rare. Either way, the same halachos apply by all five. Is that when it comes to tzibur, we say that none of these five things apply by tzibur, and that was our case of chatas shemesu be'aleh doesn't apply by tzibur, and that is how we enter our question from the bottom of Vav Amud Aleph. That according to Reb Shimon, he holds that chatas. What is it? Chatas be'aleh shemesu, that it doesn't apply by a din of tzibur. Hadron alach horu bezin baruch Hashem. We finished the first perek of Maseches Horiyos. We should come back to this daf in 7.5 years, and let us continue with the new perek of Hora Kohen Mashiach. The Kohen Mashiach is a reference to the Kohen Gadol. It's the Mishnayos language of Kohen Gadol, as well as the phrase of Kohen Gadol. And we're going to be discussing this a little bit. Hora Kohen Mashiach la'atzmo shogeg va'asa shogeg may be par. If the Kohen Mashiach, who is the Kohen Gadol, he paskins something for himself b'shogeg, and then acts upon his own psak b'shogeg, and then he finds out that he's wrong, the halacha is may be par. If he's shogeg va'asa mezid, or mezid va'asa shogeg, pater. If the psak was a shogeg, but the activity he did was mezid, meaning before he did the activity, he realized his psak was wrong and did the action b'mezid, or the psak was b'mezid, and then by the time he got around to the act itself, it was b'shogeg because he figured out he really did make a mistake. In both of those cases, he's pater from the par. Why? Shehoras kohen mashiach la'atzmo, kehoras bezdin l'tzibur. So here we have a strong and unique comparison, that the psak of a Kohen Mashiach, of a Kohen Gadol for himself, is similar to a Horas Bezdin Litzibor, which is that both the psak has to be b'shogeg and the violation has to be b'shogeg. But just like when it comes to Horas Tzibor, like the first parak we were talking about, Bezdin making a mistake and the Jews following, everything has to be b'shogeg. So too by the Kohen Mashiach, everything has to be done b'shogeg in order for him to be chayav a par. Now, this is bichlal a unique chiddush that a Kohen Gadol is going to bring apart. He paskin the shaila for himself, did the thing, and then he's chayav apart. Mechudesh tikadin, anyways. So let's learn a little bit about this. The Gemara says 6 lines or so, 5-6 lines from the.
For himself.
This is for himself.
It was specific for him. There's nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, even on Yom Kippur, we'll see this in the Gemara if we get there today. Even on Yom Kippur, the korban that the Kohen Gadol brings to give us kapara doesn't give him kapara. He has a separate par that he brings for himself. Yeah.
Making sure you can that side, not on this.
Right. It's only on his side. It's only the korban that he brings for himself. So asks the Gemara, I don't understand. Shogeg v'asa shogeg maybe par pshita. That's like, that's like the case in a vacuum. That's like the most typical case of bringing a par. So why would you say shogeg v'asa shogeg maybe par? That's obvious. Amar Abaye, hacha b'mayaskin, and it's never as simple as you think. We're learning Shas. Everything is complex. Says the Gemara, Kigon shahara v'shachach me'eza tamhora. He gave a psak and he forgot which psak he gave. Ushashata, when he did finally do the activity that he shouldn't have done. Amar, what did he say? Hareni ose al das hora si, which should be the right thing because he's talking about himself. I did this on my own psak. I did this on my own volition and on my own halachic conclusions. Demau de tema, I might have thought. If someone would have told him that he made a mistake, Shema Hadarbe, then maybe he would have gone back. And the fact that he still continued is Kamezi. Oh, because you might have known, right? So says the Gemara, Kamash Malan, that that's not true. Is that if we have a case that if he would have known about it, we assume he would have recanted. And therefore, that's the case that we're talking about in our Mishnah. So says the Gemara, Minohani Mili. How do we know this idea at the conclusion of the Mishnah? Our Mishnah had said on the third line of the new parak, Shehoras Kohen Mashiach La'atzmo Kehoras Bezdin L'Tzibor, that when a Kohen Gadol makes a psak and follows his own psak, that we treat it the same way that we do a case of Horas Bezdin B'Tzibor, that everything has to be B'Shogeg. So says the Gemara, the Tanu Rabbanon, last line of Avamid Beis. That we have a brisa. This brisa is found in the Midrashim on Vayikra, in Torah's Kohanim and Parshas Vayikra. So says the Gemara, La Ashmas Ha'am, Hare Mashiach Kitzibur. The Mashiach is like Tzibur. And what's missing from the Gemara is the full comparison. Again, a lot of textual challenges in Maseches Horiyos. If you have this on the side, do you have something on the side here? Or on the last line here, it says, La'ashmasam hare Mashiach ketzibur. Right there, I have a little zayin. Okay. And then it says, Ma tzibur ein meviin ella al ha'elam davar. Oh, really? So says the Gemara. Look at this Marimakum. This is what it says on the side. I'll read it for you. B'yalkut Shimoni gores kan, and then it quotes it as follows. Remember what we said. Hare Mashiach ketzibur. That's what the Gemara says. Here is the equation. Mat tzibur, just like when it comes to the people, ein mevi'in ela al ha'elam davar b'shigigas ma'isa, that the only time that a bezdin would ever be chayav a par ha'elam davar shel tzibur is if they make the psak and the yidden do the aver b'shogeg. Af Mashiach, same thing is true by Kohen Gadol. Einu mevi ela al ha'elam davar b'shigigas ma'isa. Very interesting how much is missing from the Gemara. And not even a note.
Just telling us that the word shiachol is big enough. That's all.
Oh, that I have
That's
too.
totally, yeah, that's the next piece.
So it doesn't seem that way from the Rishonim on the page from over here. It seems that when the Medrash was quoted elsewhere, not in Shas, but when the Medrash was quoted, that it was quoted with this extra explanatory phrase of what the comparison is. So just, again, back to the bottom of the page on Vav Amud Beis, is that there's this comparison, that when the tzibur does something b'shogeg based on a psak of Bezdin, that Bezdin will be chayav a par helam davar so forth. The same exact thing is going to be true when it comes to the Kohen Gadol, that if he makes a psak and follows his own psak, that is when he would be chayav, and that's why we have this full comparison. Says the Gemara, I could prove the other way. V'alo dinu, let me show you that we don't even need the pasuk. I'll come up with the svara on my own. Top of Zion Amud Aleph. Tzibor motze michlal yachid. A tzibor is different than a yachid. Umashiach motze michlal yachid. And a Kohen Gadol is also different. Rashi tells us at the top of the page, tzibor motze michlal yachid. Why is a tzibor different than a yachid? The yachid, when an individual does an avera, maybe kisva o seira, he brings a female animal for a chatas. The tzibur may be par, and they bring a cow. Those are very different animals. A male cow. So that's one difference. Mashiach is also not the same. And back in the Gemara on Zayin Amud Aleph on the second line, Ma tzibur, just like when it comes to a tzibur, Ein chayovin ela al helam davar im shigigas maisa. That the only way that a bezdin would be chayav a par helam davar shal tzibur is if they make the psak and the Jews violate the iser b'shogeg without any foreknowledge that what they were doing was in fact wrong. Af Mashiach lo yehi chayav ela al helam davar im shigigas maisa. So the Brisa here says that perhaps we can then say all this is in the Brisa, even the Vahalo Dinu, all this is a Brisa, and we'll see that it's quite a long Brisa in a moment. So our first approach over here is that, hey, maybe we don't need a pasuk. After all, the tzibur is not the same as a yachid, and Mashiach, the Kohen Mashiach, is not the same as a yachid, and therefore common denominator is what? Maybe they're both the same, and therefore I don't need the pasuk of la'ashma sa'am. The Brisa continues, O kalach laderech zu, lav dafka. Maybe I could learn things in a totally different way. That nasi motze michlal yachid, that a nasi is different than an individual. Umashiach motze michlal yachid, and so is the Kohen Gadol. Ma nasi maybe b'shigigas maisa below helam davar. That if a nasi does an avera and it's below helam davar, it's not with forgetfulness. If the nasi does an avera straight up, below helam davar, he does an iser. Af Mashiach maybe shigas ma'aseh below helam davar. In other words, there's many ways that we can learn a gzera shaba or concepts like that, or a hekesh. So the Gemara says you might have thought like the Bahalo Dinhu that maybe we can learn that because the tzibur is different than a yachid and Mashiach is different than a yachid, that perhaps we could have been without the pasuk. Says the Gemara, that's not true, because I could have quite similarly learned that there is an equivalence between a nasi and Mashiach. And just like a nasi, when he does something wrong, he brings a par, even if it's bemazed. So maybe I would then have thought that the same thing is true by the Kohen Mashiach, by the Kohen Gadol, that he too, if he does something bemazed, unlike our Mishnah, maybe that's what I would have learned. And therefore, we do need the pasuk of la'ashmas ha'am to teach us that when the Kohen Gadol brings a par, it's only if it's shogeg b'shogeg. The psak was b'shogeg and the behavior was b'shogeg. Nira lemidome. Let's see which of these is more comparable. Is it better to compare Mashiach, a Kohen Gadol, to what we started with at the top of the page, a tzibur, or is it better to compare it to a nasi? Says the Gemara, tzibur bepar, ve'ein mevi'en asham talui. When it comes to a tzibur, so a tzibur brings a par, but a tzibur never brings an asham talui. Umashiach bepar, ve'ein maybe asham talui. Here we see even more of an equivalence, that both tzibur and Mashiach, there is no asham talui. Therefore, and we're about 10 lines down, Ma tzibur eino chayv ela al helam davar shigigas ma'isa. Mashiach lo yechayv ela al helam davar shigigas ma'isa. I could have said that svara. Remember, which one's a better comparison? All of this is trying to say, is it possible to learn out this din that Hare Mashiach ketzibur, that the Kohen Gadol is like a tzibur, that everything has to be done b'shogeg in order to be chayv? So we're seeing all of these different svaras, lekanu lekan. So we thought maybe that really we should double down on our comparison of a tzibur to Mashiach, and therefore we would be able to learn out the same conclusion that Mashiach is ketzibur. Says the Gemara, no, lav dafka. O klach l'derech zu. Maybe there is a strong comparison still between a nasi and the Kohen Mashiach, and we're a quarter of the way down. Nasi maybe seira. A nasi brings a female animal, be'avodas kochavim, maybe asham vadai, and they bring an asham as well. Mashiach maybe seira be'avodas kochavim, maybe asham vadai. Both a nasi and the Kohen Gadol, they would bring these respective korbanos in the case of avodas kochavim, and therefore maybe we are back to the oklach l'derech zu. Maybe we're back to the svara that we compare the Kohen Gadol to a nasi. Ma nasi maybe b'shigigas maisa, af Mashiach maybe b'shigigas maisa. Says the Gemara that just like a nasi would only be bringing a korban if it was done accidentally, so to af Mashiach, perhaps it would still be the case of maybe b'shigigas maisa. L'maisa, what we're seeing from our Gemara is that no svara of our own is mukhrach, because I can choose to compare the which case are we talking about over here? The case of Kohen Gadol. I can choose to compare it to the case of the tzibur, in which case I could come to the same conclusions, or I can compare it to a nasi, in which case we won't. Therefore, because we don't have clarity of our own svaras, Talmud Lomar, says the Gemara, a third of the way down, la'ashmas ha'am. We needed the pasuk, because there was no way for us with our own mental gymnastics to come up with a definite comparison, because I could have compared a Kohen Gadol to the tzibur, or I could have compared it to a nasi. Both of them are excellent svaras, and therefore we needed a pasuk. Says the Gemara, Lashmas ha'am harehu Mashiach ketzibor. Ma tzibor. By the way, what the Yalkut Shimoni says in the footnote that I have over here is that this quote that we're about to read of Ma tzibor was actually found earlier and not here. So the line that we're about to see, maybe because you have it here, it could just be that the Shita didn't hold like the Yalkut Shimoni. Ma tzibor enu mevi ela al helam davar im shegigas maisa af Mashiach enu mevi ela al helam davar im shegigas maisa. So here we've concluded with clarity. We're trying to look at the end of our Mishnah, and if you look back at our Mishnah, just keep a hand right here a third of the way down. Our Mishnah said, Horas kohen Mashiach le'atzmo ki horas bezdin letzibor. We compared them. How do we know that? It's not because of a svara, because if we try to employ our own svaras, we'll end up befuddled. There's no way for us to clarify what's a better comparison to kohen Mashiach. Is it better to compare it to tzibur or to nasi? We can't do that. We can't do it on our own. Talmud lomar lashmas ha'am. Ema says the Gemara, perhaps we can say as follows: Matzibor horev asu achra behoraaso chayavin. Just like by a tzibur horev asu achra behoraaso chayavin, that if the bezdin makes a psak and the tzibur follows their chayav, af Mashiach shehorev asu achra behoraaso yechayav. Maybe the Kohen Gadol is equivalent to a Sanhedrin, and that, remember, our Mishnah was talking about the Kohen Gadol listening to his own psak. Maybe the Kohen Gadol is the same as Sanhedrin, in that if he says something and other people listen to him, he should bring a par helam davar shel tzibor. Our Mishnah only spoke about the case of him and himself. He makes the psak shogeg and he does the action b'shogeg. He's chayav a par. But why don't we compare them? Why don't we then say that perhaps he'd be chayav if other people listen to him? Talmud lomar v'kriv al chataso asher chata. That's what the pasuk says. What's the drasha? Al mashachatahu maybe. The ain maybe al mashachatau acherim. Says the Gemara, super clear, based on the pasuk, that even though there is room to compare a Kohen Gadol to the tzibur, in regards to this as well, that just like by a tzibur, they're following a psak, maybe if other people followed the Kohen Gadol and the Kohen Gadol was wrong and everything was done b'shogi, they'd be required to bring a par. Kamash Malan, we don't hold that way. Amar Mar, heading toward the Mishnah on this page, we're on Zayin Amar Aleph. Amar Mar, Mashiach bepar, ve'ein maybe Asham Talui. We learn this line that a Mashiach, the Kohen Gadol, he brings a par, but no Asham Talui. Minale de'ein maybe Asham Talui. Mehechatesi, how do we know that a Kohen Gadol would not bring an Asham Talui if he was unsure what psak he said? Says the Gemara Dichsid, because the pasuk says, this is a pasuk in Vayikra Perek Hey, v'chiper alav hakohen al shigagaso asher shagag. What does this mean? Mi shechataso v'shigagaso shave. When one's intentional avera and one's accidental avera are the same. Yatsa Mashiach she'ein shigagaso v'chataso shave. Because the intentional crime of the Kohen Gadol is different than the accidental crime. Dichsiv lashma sa'am harehu Mashiach ketzibor. Oh, we already compared them, so we're actually, and this is, I'm surprised this isn't. I'm surprised this wasn't brought as a question. We already used that pasuk, right? Now we're using the pasuk again. We said lashma sa'am to teach us the equivalence between Kohen Mashiach and Horas Bezdin. Yet over here, we're broadening it a little bit to remind us, I guess it is somewhat similar, to teach us that the truth is it is quite similar, just to show us that the only time that he'd be chayiv is if it was a din b'shogeg. Asks the Gemara, la'ashmas hayem ad kan lo ka'amar le. Up until this point, in regards to the conversation of Asham Talui, the pasuk hadn't really said the words la'ashmas ha'am yet. So says the Gemara, you're right. Elo Asham k'dei nispa. It was only brought in because of the dialogue. It wasn't actually the right place to mention Asham Talui, and the Brisa that we just learned shouldn't have even spoken about it. That brings us to the next Mishnah. Yeah, we're not getting as far as I wanted, but that's okay. We'll get there. Or Rabbi Handler, we'll get there. We'll see. Says the Gemara, Hore bifnei atzmo, ve'asa bifnei atzmo, miskaper lo bifnei atzmo. So in regards to a Kohen Mashiach, the halacha is that if he paskined for himself and he did the action for himself, he also can bring the kapara by himself. However, Hora im tzibor, v'asa im tzibor, miskaper lo im tzibor. What if this Kohen Gadol gave a psak alongside Bezdin, and he acted with the people? So then, she'ein Bezdin chayav ad sheyoru levatel mixas. Miskaper lo im hatzibur. His kapara is with them. Why? She'ein Bezdin chayav ad sheyoru levatel mixas ulekai mixas v'chein Mashiach. The halachos of Mashiach, of Kohen Mashiach, and Bezdin are the same. That he has to only violate a partial halacha, like we saw earlier in the previous parak. The same is true by avodas kochavim. You can't uproot all of avodah zarah, but you can say on Tuesdays we're allowed to do avodah zarah. And if you say that, so then you're the type of bezdin that would be chayiv in a par helam davar shel tzibur. Says the Gemara Minohani Mili. How do we know that these halachos are true? The Tanu Rabbanon. We learned this in a brisa. This is also found in the Medrash. I don't know. Can you see the Maseches Hashas? You see this in Os Katan Gimel. I've never seen this before. He says Toras Kohanim Parshas Vayikra Devora Dechova. What? What?
That was it.
Where?
The Shas says Toras Kohanim Parshas Vayikra and does not give any more.
Oh.
Seems to have the same thing. You have a more.
Yeah, it says. It looks like the word Debore and Dechova, Perek Beis. It's like a location. Devora Dechova. I don't know. I've never. Daled Beis Vav Resh Aleph. Debore is what it looks like. And the next word is Dechova. I've never heard of it before. It's on the previous page also. I just didn't call it out. It is in a different font in my Maseches Hashas. It says here, Maseches Hashas im hosafos. So apparently, I don't know, what does that even mean? I don't know. They added, what, did the author write it or they added it on their own? I don't know. Okay. Minani Mili de Tanu Rabban, and the Medrash says, Hore, we're at 10 lines from the bottom, 12 lines from the bottom. Hore imat tzibur, v'asa imat tzibur, yachol yavi parla atzmo. Maybe we should say that this person, that this Kohen would bring his own par. Says the Gemara V'dinhu. Nasi motze michlal yachid, u'mashiach motze michlal yachid. We saw this at the top of this page. We see that there's a difference between, an equivalence between a nasi who's different than a yachid and a mashiach who's different than a yachid. Ma nasi chata bifnei atzmo, maybe bifnei atzmo. Chati matzibur mischaper lo matzibur. Just like when it comes to a nasi, that if he did an avera by himself, then he would bring his own korban. But if he did an avera with the people, then his kapara is with the people and not his own par. Af Mashiach, the same thing will be true for Mashiach. That chata b'tzibur, chata bifnei atzmo, maybe bifnei atzmo. That if he did the isra on his own, then he'd be chayav a par. However, chata imatzibur miskaper lo imatzibur. So says the Gemara, I don't need your quote of the Gemara. This is very logical. I can figure it out on my own. Says the Gemara, lo, because there's a difference between a nasi and the Kohen Mashiach. What's the difference? So this is what the Gemara says now. The Gemara says, lo, imamris benasi, there's a uniqueness by a nasi. Shekain miskaper lo imatzibur b'yom kippurim. The nasi gets kapara on Yom Kippur. And this is, Stan, what you and I were talking about earlier. Tomer b'Mashiach, she'enu miskaper lo imatzibur b'yom kippurim. Because he brings his own animal. Hol ve'em miskaper lo imatzibur b'yom kippurim, yachol yavi par le'atzmo. So you're going to say that that he's going to bring his own part? That's not possible. What's the actual case? So it says the Gemara. 4 lines from the bottom. Chata bifnei atzmo, maybe bifnei atzmo. Chata imatzibur mischaper lo imatzibur. Hechidami, what's the case? Ilema dehu mufla v'hein ein mufla'in. If you want to say that he, the Kohen Gadol, was a mufla, Behaim, the people in the Bezdin were not Einan Muflam, they were not exceptional Talmidei Chachamim. Pshita de miskaper lo bifnei atzmo. Hora de lahon v'lo klum. Their psak was a 0 because they didn't know what they were talking about. That's if the Bezdin and the Kohen Gadol gave the same psak. There we don't even look at the Sanhedrin if they're Amaratza. We ignore them. Your psak is a 0. Uboy asuye kispa useira kol chad v'chad. And if they are such horrible dayanim, so then everyone has to bring their own korban because the Bezdin's psak doesn't create a leniency for the people. If the Bezdin, nobody was home, if they were a Bezdin that were not of Muflaim, and they gave a psak, the people shouldn't have listened to them, bichlal. Those people, the Dayanim, were not muflaim, so they shouldn't listen. And therefore, everyone has to bring their own korban. V'di inun muflaim v'hu lav muflam. If Bezdin, inun, if the Bezdin was mufla, they were exceptional Talmidei Chachamim. V'hu and the Kohen Gadol was lav mufla. Amai miskaper lo bifnei atzmo. Then how can he even help himself? He's an Am Haaretz, Kohen Gadol, who's bringing korbanos for his own averos. His own psak doesn't matter. So just like by a tzibor, by a Bezdin, if the Bezdin was a bunch of rebellious rabbanim who didn't know what they were talking about, there's no paralim davar shel tzibor. The same thing will be true by Kohen Mashiach. If you're not a Talmid Chacham, it's like you can't be a kofar unless you know stuff. You can't give a psak unless you know stuff. It doesn't even count. There's nothing of value in regards to his psak. That brings us to the top of Zayin and Beis. We'll head to the 2 dots, just 7 or 8 lines from here, and then we'll have to pause. Amar Rav Papa, what case must we be dealing with? Kigon shahayu muflin shnehem. That both of them, both the Sanhedrin and the Kohen Gadol, they were both muflin, they were both exceptional. And Savar Abai Lemeimar as follows. Chata bifnei atzmo v'asa bifnei atzmo. If the Kohen Gadol did an Avera by himself and he paskined and he did the Avera, Hechidami. The Yasvi b'shnei makomos. Maybe he was sitting in 2 different locations. V'kamoru b'trei isure. In 2 different places, he paskins 2 different things. Rav was like, who cares what location you're in when you paskin? What does that have to do with anything? Amar le Rava atu shnei makomos garment. What does that have to do with anything about it? That's very weird. Ella says the Gemara is 5 lines down on Zayin and Beis. Says the Gemara, Ella filu yasve bechad makom. Even if they're sitting in the same place. V'chevan deka moru b'trei isure. That's still considered him doing the Avera all by his lonesome. So we'll stop right here at Pshita, at the 2 dots, 6, 7 lines from the top of Zayin and Beis. Emir Tzashem will pick up tomorrow night with as much as we can. We're getting there. This coming blot is only slightly longer than anything in Avodah Zarah. All right. Wishing you all a beautiful night.